Of the Public Services Commission for March 21st of the great year of 2022. Pledge allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. At this time, we're going to move I'd like to do approval of the minutes, but before we do that, I would like to introduce two of our new commission members. Lisa Rziski. I was close.
You were.
And Lisa's home phone number is, you have to ask her, and Lisa Cons.
Yes, correct.
There are two new commission members. Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome back and welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And I would to move the approval of the agenda.
I'll move the agenda.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion? No. Approval of the minutes for January 31st.
I'll move them.
And the second.
Second.
All right. Open forum, would you like to, there's nobody out there? Presentations, we'll move right into use of force. Deputy Director.
See how I can get this going. Everyone see that or no? You guys have it on your?
It's on
Yep.
ours.
Okay. Well, Chair and Commission, I have the honor to present our 2021 Annual Use of Force Report. I'm going to be going through this presentation. Please stop me if you have any questions at any time during the presentation to ask any questions. I just want this to be a flow back and forth. You can ask questions. The presentation itself will be then presented to council at the next meeting. So you guys get the first preview, look at it, see what you think of it. If there's any questions, concerns, anything you want to change, or anything that you think is missing that you would like to see added as well. I'll be very transparent. Sergeant Brad Peterson put this together. He does an excellent job on PowerPoint. He is much more proficient than I am, so this is his presentation, but we're going to go through it. The contents of the presentation is what it says here. We're just going to go over the summary, the statistics, kind of go over some notes, training, and equipment recommendations as we move forward. Chief's message, I'm not going to read it for you. It's on the screen. I'm sure all the people at home that are watching will be able to hit pause on their DVR and read this whole message for themselves. It's an excellent message that just talks about our vision and why we do what we do. Okay, I'm going to just real quick kind of talk about how it is that we collect the data, right? So use of force is kind of a buzzword that you've all seen on the media. Everyone kind of knows what use of force is, but each agency collects it differently, right? There's no standard per se on the collection of what needs to be collected, how it needs to be collected. There's a number of reports that have to be sent to the state and to the federal government, but other than that, it's very dependent upon an organization, right? So we kind of go best case, best practices, kind of above and beyond what the majority of other agencies do, okay? So we're gonna go over real quick what kind of the options are. We will talk about pre-force tactics. What that means is kind of time, distance, cover, the verbal commands, de-escalation, kind of those things we do prior to arrival or as we arrive. And then you have empty hand techniques is just what it sounds like, right? I want somebody to do something, I'm putting my hands on them and directing them. Whether it's through pressure points, takedowns, or whatever it might be. Then we have less lethal options within here. You'll see that the only one that's missing is actually a straight baton. We very rarely, I don't think we've used a baton against a person in the last 8 years. So we collect the data, have it in here, but it's not really listed here. But you'll see we have OC spray, which we carry on our belts, a pepper ball, which is something we carry in a squad, taser, which is on person, 40 millimeter impact, 12 gauge impact are all in the car. And then the K9 obviously is specific to the officers trained in that. Lethal options.
Director, could we,
Yep.
just for the audience and for myself, could you tell us what the OC spray is?
Sure. Oleoresin capsicum. It's pepper spray, for a lack of a better word. So it is what it sounds like. It's a hot pepper mixture with a propellant, and it's sprayed in the face of the individual to gain compliance for them doing whatever it is that they're doing. It kind of momentarily and temporarily makes them very uncomfortable, which then could give us that next step. Lethal options, so we have lethal cover. Firearms can be used as lethal options, vehicles, and then pretty much anything else used in a capacity that could turn lethal, right? That means a chair. That means anything it is, right? Just what it sounds like, improvised weapons. Then we have pursuit intervention techniques, PIT, TVI. Those are two different maneuvers that we use during pursuits to stop that pursuit at slow speeds. We'll actually make intentional contact, spinning that around. The TVI is the second squad end, blocks it. The first squad comes back around and you kind of stop their momentum. Blocking and stop sticks. Blocking is very rarely done, but on occasion, on real severe incidences, you'll do a blocking. But spike strips is something that you see, and I'm sure you've all seen different shows where we have that, and that's in every squad car. So real quick, I'm going to walk you through kind of here's an imaginary stop, okay? We have a stolen vehicle at night. We're conducting a high-risk stop, and it's occupied by two people. And now this is how we actually have the data collected, okay? So as you can see, subject one is compliant. So we use pre-force tactics. What does that mean? Multiple officers were there. We use time distance cover, right? If we make a felony stop, we're not running up to the car. We're using distance, right? Those pre-force things that we talked about. And then we gave verbal commands on what we want to do. And the person becomes compliant, but the first officer's got a firearm pointed in the direction. That in and of itself requires a use of force form. If we draw our weapon and point it at someone in the city of Cottage Grove, it's a use of force form, okay? Just right off. There's a lot of departments that do not have any requirement for use of force reporting on pointing a firearm. We pretty much, anything other than a standard, you're under arrest, put your hands behind your back, anything beyond that is a use of force report, okay? So we kind of go, like I said, well beyond what we need to, but it's really best practice. But in comparison to other agencies within the state of Minnesota, I think we're very progressive in that. Second officers got a firearm also, so we may have somebody with a rifle, somebody with a handgun, and then prone handcuffing, so a restraint technique. So not just handcuffing, right? I'm asking them to go on the ground, put their hands behind their back, and go. So those are 5 use of force incidences with this one person, okay? So that all needs to be reported, and it's all in a drop-down category. Each person has their own, and we go through a whole checklist. Now, number 2 isn't so compliant. So now you see all the things that we do and all the things that we report for this incident. So you got multiple officers, you're still doing the pre-force tactics, right? Lethal cover, because it's a felony. Less lethal options, what do we have? We have pepper ball. We deployed pepper ball in this case. It was ineffective, so we'll do a saturation. And a pepper ball is just what it sounds like. It's a paintball, and within the paintball in themselves is an OC or a chemical that's used the same way pepper spray is, right? There's also inert, which is just a baby powder type thing, but we'll use that as a saturation so we can shoot 5 to 6 rounds in the area, kind of creates a cloud, so it's me being able to spray someone from 40 yards instead of walking up to them. Yes, Lisa?
I heard you say you spray in the area, so do you not hit the subject with?
So there's 2 different ways. The first technique is saturation, so you're just hitting the area. The next is direct impact, so it's kind of ratcheting up, right? And we try to do the lesser of all when at all possible, and we kind of move forward as we progress. So if somebody's inside a car, we can actually shoot pepper ball through a window. Not hit the person ever, but saturate the car with a spray, right? So less lethal, we talked about this, it wasn't effective. Tasers displayed. Even taser display, if I pull my taser out and turn it on and say stop or this is gonna happen, that's a display, right? That's a use of force. Those are all reported. Every time they pull their taser out and they're pointed in the direction of the subject, it's considered a use of force. Then deployment, in this case, person didn't listen, they deployed it. Then we went into a grappling, put the person on the ground, and then did a handcuffing. So all of these are recorded as a use of force, right? So as you see on the right, that's 1 incident, 3 officers, 2 subjects, 18 uses of force. So we'll get into the numbers as we start moving forward. 6 applications of pre-force, 6 displays, 4 applications of actual force, and then 2 restraints, okay? So it's kind of a lot, right? This is a pretty big for just one felony stop with 2 subjects in it. So then, after we're done with this, this is what the officer does and the supervisor does. So the officer must complete a detailed report. In addition to that, the use of force supplemental report, which has all those drop downs, right? So it'll have the subject's name, date of birth, all that information, and then within that is what they did. So all those things from the previous screen, they'll drop down, and they'll click on all of those so it shows exactly what they did, right? The sergeant is then responsible for going to the scene of a use of force. Generally, they go. On some occasions, if it's a no force used, maybe it was just a display, no injuries, they may or may not actually show up. They'll review everything after the fact, okay? But if there's a use of force with any injury to the subject or any others, they have to respond. They'll get statements. They'll do everything that they would do on a normal investigation, basically to ensure that the officer did what they were supposed to do properly, right? They'll ask the officers on the side, okay, what happened? They'll ask the subject separate from the officers. Are you injured? Do you need medical care? Did they treat you right? Was there anything that you felt was inappropriate? They'll actually do all that questioning because, believe it or not, people will say, I'm really sorry. I shouldn't have done all those things. And if we record all that during our incident, and then they come back in 2 years and sue us for excessive force, and we have all of that already documented, we're protecting the officers, we're protecting the city, the department, and we're really saying exactly what happened, right? There's nothing surprising there. And then after that, there's a review committee. So we have 2 supervisors, 2 sergeants, and 2 patrol officers that sit on a review committee that go over all of the use of forces for that quarter. And they sit down, review them all, watch the videos, say whether or not it was appropriate, not appropriate, policy violations, no policy violations, and then they can, if they see something that's not right, they can kick it up to administration, which is then my job to investigate that further. And that can happen either through the review committee, or if somebody comes in to the police department or goes online, I want to make a complaint, there's a form right online that they can fill out, and then I'll start the review process before any of this happens, right? So it can come to administration in a myriad of different ways, whether it's through the review committee that we actually see and say, this wasn't right, boss, we need to do something here, that we'll start a review that way, or from a citizen complaint or a witness complaint, right? So it comes to us in a couple different ways. So we'll get into it. This is the dashboard that Brad made with assistance from Neil Bell's camp, did this whole entire database. This wasn't purchased, this was made in-house, okay? So it's a rather impressive amount of information, because believe it or not, there's a lot of databases, but not the way we wanted to categorize it, right? We want to know what they did all the way through the incident from start to finish. So that's just kind of a look. Here's our statistics for the city of Cottage Grove. As you can see, 44 officers. We give you a geography, a population for minorities, people of color, medium household income or poverty rate. And you kind of see where we're at for population, calls for service, and then crimes. Thank goodness the crimes is way at the bottom. Those are type 1 and type 2 crimes. So we do have a rather low crime statistics in the city of Cottage Grove, which is a great thing. But as you can see, the population continues to grow. We had a really odd 2020 to 2021. Our call volume fell because of COVID. I think Rick can attest, we thought ambulance services was going to go through the roof, that we were going to be, ambulance fell. Everything kind of fell from that 20 to 21. It was a very odd, everything else has kind of been doing this, right? Population goes up, crime rates go up, ambulance goes up. Now we're seeing that, and Rick can attest to that as well. Our ambulance runs are way up now in comparison to the last year. So that's where we're at. So we had a total of just under 32,000 calls for service. And that includes traffic stops, people calling in, park checks, business checks, right? Anything we enter on the computer as a call for service or what we're doing and operating on, we're at about 32,000. We had 75 incidences of force. out of that 32,000, okay? And remember, we talked about what force is, pulling out a taser, having your handgun out, or a rifle out. There's 99 subjects within those 75 incidences. And then we threatened the use of force or displayed a weapon 157 times. 79 actual applications of force. So you can see 79 from the 157. So you actually get quite a bit of compliance just by displaying whatever it is that you have for a system. So that is in and of itself de-escalation, right? Some people might not categorize it as, but if I'm doing something to elicit a response of cooperation, I'm de-escalating that. Even if it seems like I'm escalating or I'm using force, it is a form of de-escalation. So here's an interesting statistic, I thought, as we do these every year. We had about a 50-50 split between called for service and officers out proactively policing the community, right? Finding things. We had a lot of stolens. We had a lot of things that we hadn't in the years past. But this tells me it's a 50-50 split. When you start to look at staffing levels and everything else, they really say every officer should have a 40% minimum free time to do outside stuff, right? So we're at a good number right here. We're seeing 50-50. That means A, our cops are still out actively patrolling. They're actively getting involved in incidences, and they're actively taking people into custody. And some of those results are uses of force incidences, whether it's called to or not. But a 50-50 split is a really good number. So of these incidences, I'll kind of go back to 2019, 2020, 2021. As you can see, the calls for service are times 1,000, so we had 29,000 calls for service with 75 incidents in 19, 20. You had the 350 or 35,000, then you had 31,000. So you see 2020, even though our call volume was higher for all the things we were involved in, our crime rate was down, but our call volume was up. So we had a lot of people calling in a lot of different things that weren't crime related. But that's also officers having more additional free time, so they're doing more parks checks. They're doing more of those business checks. They're getting out in the public more often. Deadly force incidences. And before we get to deadly force, I just want to talk about the incidence of force. So when we use force, if you look at it, 0.24% of the time. So 1/4% of all calls for service, we used any force. And remember what that force is. Just pulling out and displaying a weapon. So it's a very small amount. Even though people see things in the media and they see things otherwise, it doesn't happen very often. And believe it or not, that number probably carries true through St. Paul, through Minneapolis, through St. Cloud. The numbers don't change a whole lot for use of force, to be very honest. Their call volume's way up, so their use of force is up, but it's a proportionate number. And these are kind of, you can look nationally, and that's 0.24. It's not outside the realm. So deadly force incidences, we got 2019, 2020, and 2021. 0.001% of the calls did we use or try to use deadly force. And the one incident in 2019, if you recall, was the kidnapping out of St. Paul, sexual assault out of Maplewood, carjacking out of Cottage Grove, fleeing, hostage taker, ran over a tree, fled on foot, exchanged gunfire with officers, ultimately killed himself. So all of that 2019, we did shoot him, but that's not what the cause of death was in 2019. He had killed himself. Okay, none in 2020, none in 2021. I just thought it'd be interesting. I pulled I've been here, I'm going on 28 years here, so I kind of pulled back everything I've done since I've been here, plus what I know of. In 1978-ish, we had a use of force incident down on Gray Cloud where a female took shots at officers. Officers returned fire. Nobody hit anybody, including there was a small child in the back seat of the car. The officers riddled that car full of bullets and nobody was hit. That was the first time. And we've been in business as a police department for over 55 years. So that's the first one in 78. In 2010, we had on March 20th, we had an incident where an officer was making a traffic stop, known felon. He ended up getting hung up in the steering wheel when he was trying to shut the car off. He got drugged. He shot the person. Our officer pitted that car as he was hanging out of it, stopped the person. That person did succumb to his injuries in 2010. Additionally, in 2010, as a SWAT incident, and I'll go over real quick, SWAT, we're part of a Washington County multi-purpose, multi-jurisdictional team that covers the entire county, from top Forest Lake, Scandia, all the way to St. Paul Park, Cottage Grove, right? So at the time, I did 13 years, ended up as a commander. When I left that team, I was part of this one in 2010. July 7th of 2010, we had a purchase of a firearm from a felon that had just been released. We had narcotics doing an interdiction with a firearm. We ended up purchasing one gun, and he said, "Oh, I have another one. You got to follow me back to our apartment," which we thought was going to for sure be a ripoff at that point. So we made a traffic stop on him. He got out of the vehicle holding what we later learned was a scope in a shooting position, and SWAT shot and killed him in 2010. That was in Cottage Grove. So these are all Cottage Grove incidences. Other than that, there hasn't been any, other than the 2019. So you're talking about 4 incidences in 55 plus years. So that's not too many. So the .001 is actually probably .0000001 on all use of force resulting in deadly force incidents. In addition though, on SWAT, when I was on, and since we started SWAT, we had an incident in 2006, an officer-involved shooting. Subject did not die, but he is in prison. He had killed his girlfriend in West Lakeland Township and took people hostage. I was at the bottom house on that one in the basement as they made entry in the top, and he shot at the officers, and the officers returned fire. And then in 2011, we had a gentleman in St. Paul Park shoot probably about 40 rounds at our officers, including St. Paul Park, including Rick, who was at the scene at the time as a St. Paul Park police officer. And we ended up, as a SWAT incident, a long rifle sniper initiated shot him. He did not die, and he's actually just been released from prison, if you didn't know, from the 2011 incident. So that's it for use of force resulted in death. So I just kind of wanted to give you a little bit more background and history. So we'll keep going, pounding through this, but you can see that deadly force incidences in Cottage Grove and really all over are very, very rare on the number of times we do it. We'll talk about subjects' actions, when and why we use force. You can see 43% of the time they're compliant. So that means we have some information. They're armed with a weapon prior to us getting there, or they're committing a violent felony or a felony that we know as our standard operating procedure will probably point some type of weapon at them. So that's 43%. It's a pretty big percent going into it knowing that we're going to be using some type of force. 17% of the time passive, refuse commands, sitting in a car, just not doing anything, kind of like that one thing we talked about, deploying pepper ball or doing something else to try to elicit that response, because we don't know why it is that they're not complying, right? Are they trying to goad us in? Are they trying to get us closer? Because we don't want to rush things. We want to take time, distance, cover. Those are the big things when we talk about use of force. Always try to have time, distance, and cover whenever at all possible. Pre-fight, pre-attack indicators. Person squares off to you, everyone's seen it, kind of blade themselves and kind of do that one thing. They start rocking back and forth on their feet. Those are those pre-things that law enforcement officers look at and go, this guy's going to either run or he's going to throw a haymaker at me here in about 3 seconds. And we read that pretty well. So that very many, the 3% of the times we see something happening. 10% they just fled, right? So we end up tackling them or doing something else. 11% active or threatened resistance. So that is, they're straight up in clenched fist ready to go, saying, you're not going to take me. And then 16% of times they're actively attempting or threatening us, in addition to the 11%. So that's, it could start out as one way and end as another. So a very large percent of these incidences, people are really kind of, they agree with the arrests. We make a lot of arrests. We don't use force very often. Okay, force frequency, what we use, 42% lethal cover. There's that same kind of number. We just talked about 46% on the last one. We got information or we're making a felony level stop or something keyed us into believing that there's a propensity for violence. 26% we used empty hand, 21% we used a less lethal technique, 9%, which was a lot higher than I thought, was a canine. Okay? And we didn't talk about canine. When the dog comes out of the car and he's used in the incident, it's a use of force. Right? I don't think we bit anybody last year. Almost positive. I think he's only had 2 bites. Very rare. But when the dog gets there, starts barking, people tend to know that the dog doesn't much care. If they don't follow directions, the dog's going to do what they're trained to do. So they follow that. Pursuit intervention techniques, or PIT, is 2% of the force. So let's talk about threatened or displayed and then versus deployed. So how many times do I go and I pull out my taser, tell them what's going to happen, and do they just comply, right? So if you look at taser, we did a taser, either display or deployment, my math's right, 22 times. We only actually shot someone or stunned somebody 3 of the 22. So 19 times it was effective just displaying the weapon, right? K9, same thing, 20, I guess we did have 1 deployment in 2021. The 12 gauge less lethal sock round, we deployed once out of the 5 times it came out of the car. 40 millimeter was something we added to our inventory 2 years ago, so it's kind of a newer, as is pepper ball, so it's a newer. It's very interesting taser. Back when I first was a sergeant doing use of force and reviews, very rarely did a display of a taser mean anything to anybody, right? I mean, we pulled out a taser, tell them we were gonna tase them. Nobody knew what it was, and everyone got tased. It was literally a flip of this, right? Everybody knows what a taser is now, right? So when you pull out a taser and say, comply or you're gonna get tased, that's what we get. So even just having it on our belt is a huge plus for us. The pepper ball, as you can see, is rather new to the community, and it's a rather new weapon system, right? It's kind of that long range, that intermediate, but a long range. So instead of the time distance cover where I have to run up and spray someone with pepper spray, I can do it from a distance, okay? Always thinking time distance cover. So as you can see, pepper ball is new, people don't know what it is. So I have a feeling as we continue to go up, that pepper ball will get like the taser, you'll display it more often and have to use it less often. So the effectiveness, 40 millimeter, we had 100% effective because we didn't do anything other than display it the one time. Pepper ball was 50-50 on direct impact, saturation, a little bit less. Taser, you can see it was deployed very few times, 12 gauge, 50-50 effectiveness. Here's kind of the over time effectiveness. And this is why we go through multiple platforms. This is why we have a taser. This is why we have OC. This is why we have a baton. This is why we have 12 gauge, less lethal, 40 millimeter, less lethal, and pepper ball, less lethal. This is why, because over time, and this is true of all weapon systems, right? You have a 33% failure rate for whatever reason. And it could be the person moved. It didn't affect the person. I've seen people get tased, pull the wires out, right? Ineffective. So now what? So this is what we always do as we do plan A, plan B, plan C. Now what? Because we have to know that 33% of the time, anything we're trying is going to be ineffective. That's a high percentage. So you see a lot of these things on TV. Why didn't this person had the knife and they're trying to stab this person? Why didn't they just tase them first? Well, statistically speaking, if they're trying to stab another person, taser isn't what you want, right? Unfortunately, it's just not going to save the other person's life, right? There's just a 33% chance that it's not going to be effective, okay? And I don't know about you, but if my wife's being held hostage, and there's a 33% chance that my pulling out a taser isn't going to save her life, I'm not willing to take that risk for that person, right? So now we have to ratchet to the next level. Now, if I have time distance cover and there's nobody else there, do I want to use all these things before I shoot somebody? Absolutely, right? That's why we do what we do in law enforcement, but that's why we have all these different things. So just know that it's right about that a third of the time, anything we do. That includes handcuffing, joint locks, takedowns, right? And even you saw the weapons when we shot somebody. What percent of the time did we actually kill them? It was 50-50.
I've got a question.
Yep.
You have a lot of options.
Correct.
do you drag them all out of the car at the same time? Or, I mean, how does that process work? Is it multiple officers and one will have this particular job to possibly do, and this one will have this particular job, or just, what's the process there where if you, say you fire the taser and it doesn't work, do you run back and get the shotgun then, or?
Right, this is all dependent upon the number of officers, the time, distance, cover, and all those things are kind of that pre-tactics that we talk about. Those are things that are done on radio prior to arrival, right?
Okay.
So if I get a call of I'll just make up a call, right? Domestic, man with a knife, he had threatened her, didn't stab her, right? We may go in and say, one's got lethal, 2, I want you to grab the 40, 3, I want you to grab the pepper ball. We actually preload what we're doing, so everyone's going in with a different option.
Okay.
But you always have to start with, what if, right? Man with a knife, what's the first person to have to go in with? They have to have an ability to stop the threat immediately. And then from there, all of our de-escalation comes, right? So it depends on the number of officers. We're very fortunate that we have a great working relationship with Woodbury, St. Paul Park, Cottage Grove, and County on the south end, because if anything comes out, and if it's a hot call, I'm just gonna tell you, we had a supposed person with a gun at Eastridge last week. There was probably about 40 cops there from all over, within a matter of less than 5 minutes. So I sent everyone I had but 2. So there was 5 Cottage Grove, and I loaded my investigators, said, go. There was another 4 going from Cottage Grove. So you can see how quickly that gets loaded. That gets more arduous, right? Then you gotta have who's the on-site commander. Fire does this really well. They have that ingrained in where who's on-site commander and everything else. Law enforcement, we're always trying to figure that out because you just don't have the numbers you have, right? So you gotta figure that out. So somebody's gotta take command. Okay. Somebody's gotta take control. So that's kind of how that happens.
All right.
Demographics, this is interesting. Every year we do these, and we can't choose the calls we attend, right? We just go. So what we did in years past is we had just done demographics relative to race and incident. But that doesn't really tell you the picture, right? Because we have a high propensity of force against non-residents. So we have a lot of people that come to visit our city to commit crime, is what I'm saying. Look at the second category there, residency. 61% of all our use of force was somebody that did not live in our community. 39%, yep.
What's attractive in Cottage Grove for people that don't live here, want to come here and commit crimes?
We have Highway 61 that goes to the casino. We have Walmart was open 24 hours a day. We have just some.
Is it just random crimes, or is it?
It's
catalytic
random, but you're
converters?
starting to see a lot more of these shoplifting groups that are actual groups that work in tandem with one another, and they'll come and hit 6 different areas in the metro, and they'll pick East Metro one day, and they'll come down and commit a bunch of crimes. The number of stolens that roll through is an incredible number right now. I've never seen anything like it in my 28 years. The number of stolen autos that we're recovering, not that many are getting stolen from here. We're getting a few. We kind of talked about 94 last year, or last meeting, where everything's kind of migrated up to 94 corridor. But we're still seeing a lot of theft from houses, theft from cars, and then they're showing up in stolens. So it's a really weird dynamic. But you can see 61%, a full 61% don't live here. So how do you say we use force on X number of percentage when they don't live in our community? So I can't use my demographics of the city of Cottage Grove to say what percentage. So we broke that out, and it's within here. So you can see the race in and of itself, the overwhelming majority white, followed by African American Black, 26%. And then you go down to the residency race, it drops. We had a total of 9 force incidents with somebody that lives in the city of Cottage Grove. That's a person of color, 9 total. And of that 9, 4 of them is the same person. That's not a joke.
Really?
4 of the 9 was the exact same person.
And was that just this year, or?
This is
what's
2021.
2021?
This is just 2021. So we just started the residency as a new drop-down in 2021. So that was the first year, because we kept coming up with numbers and they just didn't, trying to figure out why it is. Why is our percentage of force incidences higher against persons of color? And is it? And we're starting to do numbers, and then we're starting to look at the number of people we arrest. And this is the number of use of force incidences. This is the number of people we arrest. We arrest more as a percentage that don't live in their community than that do. So it's an odd dynamic that trying to put your finger on it to make sure that we're not doing anything in ensuring. And in addition to that, we do all of our training that goes with it. But you can see 9, 2 were of Asian descent, 1 Native American, and the other is they could say I'm mixed race, or I don't want to identify as one or the other, or just refuse. And the officer is like, I have no idea. We believe a person of color, don't know what. And they just, for whatever reason, list that. So it's kind of your numbers, as you can see. When you break it down to just pure numbers, there isn't a lot of use of force, and we're definitely not targeting any group within our community.
It might be,
I've got a question on those demographics there. Why is there no Latino?
They are considered, in all of them, they're considered white.
They are, okay. All right. And the reasoning for that is?
That's how the statistics by the state of Minnesota are gathered.
Really?
Yeah. So this goes with compliance with the BCA, and so we don't just do our own records, we do something that we send to the BCA and we share all that information. So we want to make sure we're consistent and not pulling up numbers that the state isn't looking at too.
All right.
it might be helpful to keep the use of force on every slide. Because if this just gets posted out before the council meeting, or not everybody's going to be able to hear you talk
Right.
to it, versus if somebody just picks up that slide, for example, they may have a different opinion of what that slide is saying.
Well, there are definitely going to be people that will cherry pick bits of information out of a presentation. But yeah, we could try to enter that 0.24% of all incidences, and then 0.001, is that the number you're talking about?
Yeah, or even where it says demographics on the top too, what demographics from what category are we bringing? Because you said these were all the use of force demographics.
All right.
Versus total arrests.
Right. That makes sense.
Because it was more clear to me when you said this is just use of force, not everything.
Yep.
Yeah, good point.
Very good. Here was an interesting one for me, the age category. The gender didn't surprise me, although I thought female was a little higher than what I assumed it was going to be. But believe it or not, 75% of the use of force incidents are male. A lot of the female ones, I can tell you, where they're riding in a car and a stolen, because we had a lot of stolens that were taken, and they're generally a person that's sitting in the passenger seat, although we've had a number of them that were driving as well. Matter of fact, one ruined 4 of our cars on one incident. So they do flee and ram cars just like anybody else. The age demographic was the interesting one. Everyone's like under 18 is going to be your kind of your lion's share. It's pretty evenly divided if you look at it. So under 18, 16%, 18 to 24 is 14. So if you add those two together, really, prior to 24, you're at 30%. Well, you're at 30% for 35 to 44-year-olds. What does that mean? These are your domestics. These are your persons that are in crises. These are other things, right, that manifest later in life that you don't necessarily have in a younger. And to be honest with you, our younger call volume has dropped from when I started. We would have a lot of underage drinking parties. A lot of these different people are online. They're not doing those big underage parties like they used to. I can't even tell you, the dynamics has really switched over the last few years, but this one really surprised me, where you have the same number of use of force incidents between 35 and 44 than you do basically 18 to 24. So evenly distributed with age. Weapons, this is just kind of talks about were they armed, possibly armed, not armed, or unknown. So you're looking at almost half if you're unknown and with a weapon. Impairment, this doesn't surprise me at all. Substance abuse, mental illness, and then mental illness and substance abuse, 42% of all use of force. Okay, so 58% they're sober, but 42% they're on something. So I won't say half, but it's pretty close to half, right? Of all use of force. Why is it? They're not cognitively thinking properly because of either a substance or a mental illness, right? So injuries. So we had 9 minor injuries to subjects, and I'll just be transparent here. Our policy is if we shoot someone with less lethal munitions, they must go to the hospital. Okay, so part of this 9 is anytime we deployed a less lethal shotgun, 40 millimeter, or some others, they had to go. Regardless of whether they're injured or not, we evaluate them. Subject to minor injuries, that could be an abrasion as they went down to the ground, or my shoulder hurts. 4 paramedic evals, and then the 3 transports to the hospital. I think 2 of the 3 were less lethal munitions that were fired. So not very often. You can see officers 3. That's good. Usually on any use of force incidents, if you're doing hands-on, somebody's getting a cut or an abrasion. You get in any grappling, you're on asphalt, you're fighting, you're wrestling. That number is low, which is really good. No significant injuries in 2011. So review determinations. This one's, you got to go to the right before you go to the left, so it makes sense. 100% of them were deemed reasonable. But of the 100%, we take a deep dive into this and say, what is it? Could we have done anything differently? Could we have done anything better? Even if we were within policy, even if we were in a procedure, could we have done anything better? Or, I'll give you an example. In Rick's case, in the St. Paul Park incident in 2011, we had iron sights on our rifles. It was a mom and the son. The son was firing rounds and the mom was standing near him. None of us with iron sights could take a shot because there was white light emitted towards us. So we looked at that and evaluated it and said, we need to add something to our rifles in order to be able to mitigate that type of thing if it comes to fruition in the future. So we ended up putting red dots on our rifles after that incident. So when you see this training, tactics, equipment, policy concerns, that's the kind of thing that we end up coming up with. But it's also something where somebody got too close. Or we had one incident where a guy fell asleep or passed out and there was a weapon available. Instead of time distance cover, they made contact. So we looked at that and said, that's a problem. We don't do that, right? As much as you look at it and the gun's right there, I can get the gun, we don't do that. Never violated policy, 100% within. It was one of those where you're looking at it and go, time distance cover, right? How do you do this better? So then we'll re-educate or retrain an officer to make sure that we don't do it again. No, nothing referred to command to look at and say, this doesn't look right. We need to really take a deeper dive at this, whether it's criminal, civil, or disciplinary for the officer. So that's where we're at. 5% of the incidences, that just tells you we're really looking at them, right? We don't just, the review committee doesn't sugarcoat. They're pretty honest. Had a few incidences where it's like that pitch shouldn't have happened that way, or the speed was different, or whatever it might have been, or we changed policies, right? Tasers change policies over time, like constantly, because of litigation. So we'll try to catch up with that. But if an officer's using something they've done last 10 years, well, this is how we're doing it now. Now you got to make sure that you're trained up, and that's how we change policies. So those are your views. 0 citizen complaints filed with the police department regarding use of force. Doesn't mean we had 0 complaints, right? Some people complain, but none were regarding the use of force, which is impressive. Real quick, just kind of seldom used. As you can see by the numbers, deadly force is rare. It's like that 0.0000. Just remember that. If anybody asks you how often we use deadly force, like almost never, right? Low injuries, most incidents resolved in pre-force tactics. We talked about that. We don't actually use a force. We use pre-force tactics. And officers are using really good judgment. This was an incident. I'm not going to cover it real quick because we're running out of time, but it was an incident one in Newport. Female, where we definitely could have used a lethal option in this case. She was pulling the trigger on a gun, pointing at officers. She just didn't know how to take it off safe. Fully loaded, ready to go. She ended up getting shot with 40 millimeter, 12 gauge, and saturation with pepper ball. Then took her into custody. She doesn't remember any of it. She supposedly had a complete mental crack, but pointing gun, pulling trigger, and cops couldn't figure out. They kept showing up, and they're like, why is nobody else shooting? Something's not right here. Why is nobody else? Because every officer that showed up, they're like, I don't know why I didn't shoot. She's pointing the gun at us and pulling the trigger. But they had time distance cover, right? So when we deployed these other tactics, the 40 millimeter, 12 gauge, we ended up having a armored vehicle that came out of Stillwater right away and came up and could approach at a safe distance. If she is armed, that we're not gonna get shot, and then deploy those use. So that's just it's an interesting one, happened in Newport, but just because it happened there doesn't mean our officers weren't involved, because everybody was there. We talk about updated protocol for crisis intervention. We've been doing this for actually a long time. I know it's been a buzz, and we've talked about this, where what we're doing on a training for mental health and crisis, and we talked about last meeting, we added the officer to that one group, CMU, that's just all they do is full-time with this. So SWAT negotiations, the CMU unit, everyone's responded to everyone's attended a 40-hour CIT course on crisis intervention. So everyone that works the street has attended that. Protocol for high-risk warrants, you see that one just made the media not long ago in the city of Minneapolis. How is it that we do that in conjunction with, or what do we do? We did one no-knock search warrant in 2021 for the possession of a stolen firearm by a convicted felon, and it was used in a homicide, was the allegation. We do our searches a little differently. We pretty much always, if we're gonna breach, we breach and hold. In other words, we'll remove doors, however that may be, whether it's through manual or explosive breaching. And it might be a no-knock would be I didn't knock on the door before I did that, but we only did that once. But that doesn't mean we ran in to the house either, right? We will almost always, on SWAT, wait for the person to leave, whether it takes hours or days, or we'll surround, call out, breach, and hold. That is generally our tactics. Very rarely, other than hostage situations, do we make entry until we have the person in custody. Now, we'll run robots through, and we'll do other things, so we'll clear, right, by something other than a human body, but we very rarely do that. Just so you kind of had an idea if you had questions, but that's how we do our SWAT incidences, and that includes Cottage Grove too, so we're part of that SWAT. Training recommendations, we kind of talked about emphasis on taser and weapon confusion. We had an incident, so that was really part of a highlight. Make sure that we're doing what we need to do. We've done offside carry for taser for years, but we also do additional training in relationship to weapon confusion, which occurs. It occurs all throughout the United States, and it occurs numerous times per year. That was not an anomaly in Brooklyn Center. I wish I could tell you it'll never happen again, but it most likely will. But this is what we do to ensure we try not to do these things. So this is our annual training plan for 2022. 2021 looks a lot the same. So we actually, because we have the Hero Center, we do almost every other month a full day of training. So one crew works on Tuesday that they would have off. They're at the Hero Center for 9 hours. All they do is train that entire day. The other crew has a Friday that they would have been off. They come in on a Friday, and that's part of their work week, and it's 9 hours. So as you can see, we do 91 hours on average of this is the minimum we do for every officer. Add SWAT, they do 10 hours a month in addition to this. Add mobile field force, so that's another 120. Add mobile field force, they do 10-hour quarterly. Investigations does classes. This is not any other classes like I want to learn about search warrants. I want to learn about, you name it, right? Patrol tactics, extra traffic stops. They sign up for a class for NTOA hostage rescue. That's in addition to. So on average, each officer does about 150 hours a year of training. The post-mandated that the state has said is the number is 48 hours every 3 years. We average 150 a year. And that's on purpose because we want to make sure, and it's been very clear, that the council has made a direction, investing in the Hero Center, investing in our officers, make sure we're doing it right. And this is how we're doing it. So as you can see, it's all divided up there. We do on-duty shoots, we do on-duty simulators every other month. So we're in there every other month handling our weapons systems. And the on-duty simulator could be taser, turn off the lights. They'll play a scenario. You'll have to either go for your taser, handgun. Sometimes you have to go from handgun to taser. Sometimes you go for your OC. So it varies, right? And that's a simulated event that occurs every other month, in addition to handguns, which is the same type of thing. And then you can kind of see how everything else breaks down, and there's a lot of OSHA, first aid, and other stuff. But that's a commitment that we made to our officers in our city for training. We just kind of talked about what we did there as part of this. Misconduct, you see MPD, Minneapolis paid out $71 million the past 2 decades, including $27 million to the Floyd family in claims. I don't want to find some wood, but we've done very little settling of any complaints because you will have on occasion a use of force that's completely justified, that somebody brings a suit. There's nothing you can do. A lot of departments will look at that as a number, right? It's going to cost $28,000 to have an attorney review this. It's going to cost this much. So they have a threshold, right? And there are numbers that departments use. I'll just give it a number, $50,000. They'll just settle for 50 regardless. We've had the history, we don't. Because once you start settling 1 or 2 or 3, the same attorneys talk and they know where the settlement is. So if someone comes in and they know Cottage Grove pays $50,000 and that's their threshold, they're gonna come in and ask for $50,000 to settle it. We haven't. The ones that we know were completely legal and justified, it might cost us $35,000, but then we ward off the potential for any others that may occur in the future. We have settled some that I think we're completely justified, but you run the risk, right? And those are cost-benefit analysis that you kind of go through. But we've had very little lawsuits brought against us for use of force, and even fewer settlements. So policy recommendations, we don't have anything. This is what we've done though, ahead of the curve, where you saw the post board and the state and the legislature say, these are the things that need to change. I think everything except for neck restraint, we had already changed prior to, right? So the state's saying, we need to do this better. We'd already been doing it that way. So there was no changes. The only change we had is the neck restraints. We had vascular neck restraint. We were trained in vascular neck restraint. We have since stopped that training. But that was the one thing. Other than that, everything on here is what we were already doing prior to any of the state legislature mandating anything. So I think that's a pretty good thing. We've done a lot more training on duty to intervene. I think that's a hard one. Like anything else in law enforcement, if you're a new officer and you have a senior officer that's doing something you think is inappropriate, how do you stop them from doing that? We've actually role-played that a number of times. And it's interesting because they'll put the chief or myself or another captain and make a new person come in, and we'll be doing things during the scenario that's clearly inappropriate, right? Trying to get them to understand it doesn't matter who's doing it. If it's inappropriate, it's inappropriate. You need to stop. So those duty to interview, and I will say that we've done a better job on that. That was unheard of in 28 years ago when I started. You followed the lead of the person that was in front of you, and if they're senior to you, if they tell you to jump, you jumped. That doesn't happen anymore. So equipment recommendations, this is something the review committee every year comes in prior to our budget and says, admin, this is what we think we need to do our jobs better. So we do that every year. We get an opportunity from the line through the supervisors, brings it up to us. It's not us going and saying, you need this, or you need this, or you need that. It's always groundswell from the bottom up. The LISO program, Sergeant Peterson Captain Martin and Sergeant Coffey are all LISO, so that's the law enforcement supply. I don't know the exact term. It's the federal government has excess supplies of certain things. Sergeant Peterson himself, I think we're at $4.5 million worth of assets that we've obtained in the last 3 years for either SWAT, Mobile Field Force, or the city of Cottage Grove. So we're talking robots, throwbots, night vision, the armored vehicle we have, and some of the night vision, and we ended up with 14 night vision goggles, which is the quad. They come down as a 4, state of the art. They're like $100,000 a piece, all for nothing, shipping costs. So we do an exceptional job on getting the equipment that we need for little to no charge to the community. We just got another robot that just showed up, and it literally looks brand new out of the box, and it's like a $125,000 robot. And even I put it on and I could actually drive it around, and I'm not a video game guy. So it was actually really cool. So you see the replacement of ballistic shield, some other tasers. We didn't fund the Taser 7. I have some concerns with it, just administratively. So we don't always fund everything they want, but we do definitely listen to what they want from there. I'll open it up to any questions. I know you kind of did in the middle, but I'll gladly answer anything.
Are your body worn cameras covered under that funding?
Under that funding, that was a different funding
That's a
source.
different funding?
Yep, that was standard. The council came through and said, what do we need to do here? And that was after our 2019 use of force incident where we did not have body cameras, and it was pretty clear directly after that, the council's direction was, when do we get them and how fast? So we're already there, we're already looking at policies, but it just pushed
No,
ahead of
that's
time.
good.
Yep, so.
Anybody else have any questions? The Deputy Director? I just want to say that it was very, very informative. You did a very professional job, and thank you for all the insight that you gave us tonight.
Yes, if anything comes up as you hear things or want to know more, please feel free to go, and we always appreciate what we get from the city and the commissions and the council for appreciation and our community, really. We're very blessed to work for a community that really does love public safety. And it makes our job, which sometimes is difficult, a lot easier when you know you have the support of the community. So, thank you.
Thank you. And no other presentations? Is there any new business tonight? There's no old business? We have no responses? Is there any comments or requests from the commission?
I have a couple. One, I want to say, I heard that you guys provided funding to the Explorer program. I think it was about a month ago. I just want to say thank you. That was very great for mentoring and training the young ones up in this field. So thank you. I had a question on when is the cleanup day? Spring cleanup day.
Yep, we're gonna talk about that a little bit more later too, but May 7th, it's the first Saturday of May always. Wisconsin fishing opener always. Yep, there you go, Kentucky Derby Day.
Thank you. That's all I had for.
Any other requests, comments? Let's move on to staff updates. Ryan, would you like to
I
start?
can go first, yep. Good evening, Chair, Commissioners. Just expounding a little bit on the May 7th for the spring cleanup. It is from 7 to 3. And that is down at Public Works, just off of Highway 61 and Jamaica Avenue. Real similar to other years. The one thing that was changed last year, and that'll be going forward, is there's no longer the hazardous waste drop-off from the county. They have the center right here in Woodbury. They're really just encouraging folks to use that, as needed throughout the year. So they no longer had that starting last year, which we knew, the year before that was going to be ending. We did set a record last year. We had the most items and stuff collected, which was good. We made a few changes. We added a new loader station for kind of the general junk, and we had a huge line in the morning, but we got through it much faster than ever, and actually people were coming back because it was just moving pretty smoothly, so that was good. Hoping for good weather again, so we have a good turnout from that. Flushing, our citywide hydrant flushing that people see every spring, that's going to be weather dependent. The week of April 11th, that'll be starting, and we always start on the Tuesday, not the Monday, so it should be April 12th. that follows.
If I could for just a moment, I know this question comes up from the citizens of Cottage Grove. But what is the reason why the city flushes their hydrants?
Yep,
Why do we waste, the question I get asked is, why do we waste that
Why
water?
do we use that
And I
water?
do give them the answer, but I thought maybe we'd just expel on it today a little bit.
Yeah, yep, so it's a, handful of reasons. One, it's actually just good as we go through and run everything, make sure every hydrant's in good working condition, operate all the valves. Then also just cleaning out that built up, we have iron manganese in our water, that just kind of naturally settles out in the line, so we're also cleaning that out as well, which actually has been less. So with those GAC filters that we have that remove PFAS, they actually do remove quite a bit of that iron and manganese as well. So flushing's actually been going a little quicker ever since we have put those in place, and that'll even get better when we get our permanent treatment plants that'll treat all the wells in town. So that's another reason that we do that.
Maybe a follow-up question, not so much about the flushing part,
Yep.
but I've noticed in other communities with fire hydrants, we're seeing a lot of like plastic bags around them wrapped up. Is there a reason why they do it? And then are we ever going to?
That's a good question, and what it is, it's basically preservation of the hydrant. So what it's doing is in these months in the northern states that use salt, they spend a lot of money on hydrant maintenance, Public Works does, and painting. And putting the bag over it doesn't prevent fire departments from using it. They easily tear the bag off if they need to use it, but it prevents all the road salt and grime and stuff from sitting on the hydrant the whole winter and deteriorating the hydrant. So I'm not sure where the program started from, but I probably field that call about 3 times a month during the winter. It's just it's a preservation basically of the hydrant. And I think they're generally supposed to only do it if they have flags on the hydrant as well, so they're still identifiable.
Yep. And then with that flushing, Gary will touch on sweeping, but it always happens, once sweeping's done. So as long as Mother Nature keeps cooperating and we get our sweeping done, flushing will be that following week. From another Public Works project that we do contract out is our annual mill and overlay project. We started that last year, where it's really a focused mill and overlay, hitting those streets that are 15 to 20 years of age, depending on their condition. It's not an assessment. We just mill and overlay that top 1.5 inches of asphalt. We really felt that's an important process. It's not something we were really doing regularly. We were just doing full replacements at about 25 to 30 years, but where a full replacement is anywhere from $1 million to $1.5 million per mile. We're doing those assessments or mill and overlays for $200,000 a mile at that a little earlier time period, but then hopefully getting what we think is another 15 years of life out of those roads. So we started that in Councilmember Olson's neighborhood last year. I think it went really well, really well received. We're in and out. The actual work is pretty quick. There's these time delays when you're waiting for little parts, to get done because there's a little concrete replacement, things like that. But overall, pretty quick project, and it's something that I think we did good. And then one thing, it's a nice new pavement that first year, but after a year or two, all the major cracks, they do come back through. So we do a crack seal program right after that, but it really pushes off the major deterioration of the pavement, which is what we're trying to do. So the next 2 years, we're going to be working on the Grove side, south of Highway 61. So north of 90th Street, all the way up to Highway 61 in St. Paul Park, which was our 2003 roughly pavement management project. So just about 20 years old. So we're going to take bids on that on the 31st, which we'll see. There, oil's been all over the board in about the last 2 weeks. So we've got a handful of alternates in there to see what kind of pricing we get so we can maximize our effort. And then just the last thing on that is, the price increases. We've been seeing stuff all over the board. All of our materials is up 10 to 20% from last year. So it's something that we're working through constantly, whether it's Public Works stuff, even our paint and our striping and our crack seal material, or our projects, asphalt, ductile iron pipe. I mean, just your standard water main that goes into development has a 5-month lead time right now to get. So it's a lot of issues right now that we're working through. Turns out a lot of that scrap steel they used to make it came from Ukraine and Russia, so they just can't get it right now. So it's definitely a lot of interesting things we're working through this year from a Public Works standpoint and our construction, and we'll keep doing that and navigating that, but I thought it was worth mentioning. nothing else, you're not, nothing different that you're seeing, right? Everything has supply chain issues and pricing challenges, so we're definitely feeling that pretty hard this year. And with that, I'll turn it over to Gary, our street superintendent. He's got just a few streets updates.
Well, good evening, Chair and Commission.
Sir, could you state your name for the record?
Sure. I'm Gary Orloff. I'm the street superintendent.
All right.
All right, well, this spring we had a pretty good slow melt. So last week we had a few backed up catch basins and some flared end sections that were frozen. So it really was a good spring for us. And then after that, hot mix is available. So last week we started patching with hot mix. I don't know if you've seen us out. We've been on the main roads. We completed East Point Douglas, Jamaica. Today we were on 80th Street. We are also finishing up tree trimming. Like Ryan talked about before, weather permitting, sweeping will start April 5th, which usually takes us around, if weather is good, 6 full 12-hour shift days, we can get it done. And then Rick usually follows a week behind that. Another thing to bring up this year again, we're doing buckthorn pickup. So if residents can just let us know by 3 p.m. on April 22nd and bring just buckthorn up to the boulevards, we will be picking it up on the 27th and 28th. So again, that's just buckthorn, not just brush and trees. Get it out on the curbside and we'll be picking it up. Just call down Public Works and let us know. The other thing, last Wednesday, road restrictions went on March 16th, so they usually stick on around 8 weeks, but weather dependent, again, they could come off early. Other than that, let's hope we're done with that white stuff for the year and just get everything roads patched up, and that should be about it. Any questions?
Any questions of our street superintendent? Thank you, Gary.
All right, thank you.
Rick, want to go next?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commission members. Got a few things from the Fire Division. Personnel, we've completed the background process on our part-time staff that started this in the fall. 3 candidates have moved along in hiring. We have one that's in training right now at Century College. Already had EMS training but needed fire training. We have one that is completely trained and should be starting FTO soon with that other person that's in college. That'll graduate in May, so they'll start together. And then we are delaying a hiring of one of our part-timers. He was hired as a full-time member in Woodbury. So we'll see what his appetite is for coming to us after he completes his FTO up there. Generally, when staff get a full-time job in public safety somewhere else, they don't tend to stay or come back to a part-time gig. So we'll see what happens there. We are currently down to 27 part-time staff. Now, a couple years ago, we were at 50. We've had a lot of people leave through COVID and new jobs and stuff like that, so.
Excuse me a minute, when you say down to 27, or is it 27 firefighters or 27 total?
27 part-time firefighter EMT medics.
Okay.
Our full-time complement is still there of 12, but I have 2 full-timers out on medical leave right now, so I'm at 10. That does not include the 2 chief officers that are full-time. So we're going to have another testing process or open application process in May and start another process in May for part-time staff hire. So we can try and get those numbers back up. February calls for service, EMS service, for on the EMS side, we had 294 calls for service in February, and we had 70 fire rescue type calls in February. Some other items, just this last Saturday, we had the firefighter banquet down at River Oaks. We had approximately 65 current or retired firefighters attend with their significant others. Several awards were given out, including Firefighter of the Year, and that went to Alex Wiesner, which he had done a fabulous job over this last year as a newer firefighter. He's got less than 3 years on, so he put a lot of time and effort in 2021, and it was seen by a number of the command staff and a number of the officers, so they felt he was just deserved to get that award. We completed our ice rescue training down in Great Cloud on February 5th. That went well. There was no injuries. Did have some spectators show up that day. It was chilly, but some people still showed up. And even the city communications person got into a nice suit and went out in the water and got to experience that as well. We'll be coming into budget season soon, so we're preparing for our 23-24 budget process. Part of that process will be updating our vehicle replacement plan and forecasting our future staffing needs as the city grows. The need for EMS and fire services is probably going to expand. Right now, we believe we're about 10% above last year's numbers at this time. So the EMS is just continuing to grow. So we want to see what we're going to need in the future for that. So we're planning a forecast meeting for that. And then we're also working with members of the council on that, as well as a committee is formed.
Rick, if I may ask you, how many other communities do we contract with?
For EMS?
Yes.
Well, we own the PSA, or the ambulance service, for Cottage Grove, St. Paul Park, Newport, and Gray Cloud.
Okay.
We assist, or what we have is a shared service with Woodbury. So at times, people will see a Woodbury ambulance come into town. Or if we need mutual aid, they'll either see Hastings or what's it called now, M-Health. They'll come into town.
Okay.
Generally, we haven't seen M-Health come or Hastings come into town. We've been able to cover, or Woodbury has been able to cover. But we have been leaving town actually somewhat often. We've gone as far I think in January, we got called to back up in Alina in Rosemount. So everyone is short-staffed and calls are plentiful. We've gone over a number of times on the other side of the river to Inver Grove, and then South Metro area for West St. Paul and South St. Paul. So we're staying busy, staff is busy.
Okay, but our four cities is Newport, St. Paul Park, Cottage Grove, and...
And Gray Cloud, yep, that's our main contract area.
All right, thank you.
Yep, and that's all I have, so unless anyone has any questions. No, thank you.
Deputy Director, you're up again.
Well, I spent an hour of my time with you already, so I don't know how much more I have. Personnel, real quick, the two newer officers started, they're in field training, and we talked about last time, we had the two CSOs that went through the academy. We're actually starting them on the 28th of this month. So we are starting with, have 4 people that will be all in training at the same time on different shifts. So if the community sees a lot of cars with 2 people in them, no, we didn't add something different and create partners. We're in field training right now. So that happened. It was good that they went through the academy because we were able to actually stay with our complement of 44 officers. So once they're done with training, we anticipate right around June for the first 2 and July for the second 2, we'll be at 44, which is the authorized strength we currently have for the department. Other than that, 3 of those were CSOs, so we're obviously hurry up and fill the CSO spots, which are our, I will say, our gold lions that do more than their fair share of everything that the cops don't want to do. From top to bottom. So those are the ones that obviously earn their way up into those full-time positions. So we took 2 of our reserves that were interested in law enforcement, and they are now CSOs. So they're in training right now with the other 2 that are starting on the 28th. We're fast timing those to get those on board. Another one of our CSOs has a job offer with Maplewood. They kind of said, hey, when you turn 21, you have a job here. So very interesting how law enforcement is changing how they're doing their hiring processes than we used to. It used to be, 500 people waiting for one job. Now it's how many thousands of dollars can you offer someone and who can steal from who faster. And the same candidate pool is the candidate pool, right? So every time we go through a process, we'll literally have the top 10 candidates and you'll say, where are you in process and how far along are you? And you literally that day need to decide whether or not you're going to take them and put them in a fast track. So,
I think as far as the police department goes, we probably shouldn't use the word steal, but maybe acquire from another jurisdiction.
no, we're stealing. I'm not gonna mince words. I'll be very honest when we,
Alrighty.
yeah, we've actually, the chiefs have had meetings over the thievery that is occurring, because it does occur, right? So if you don't keep up, and I don't want to say with the Joneses with pay or health insurance or whatever else it is that you offer, your people leave. We have a destination department. We take people from others. We don't generally lose them to other agencies because we have the Hero Center next door, which is a big component. We have a community that loves their cops and firefighters and EMTs, and that goes a long ways on someone looking for a job. So,
Great job acquiring.
yes, we have acquired some new ones. So anyways, we have 3 other candidates that, other than the 2 CSOs that we have just started, we have 3 more that are gonna be in background. And once they finish the backgrounds, they'll go off to psychs and physicals and be starting them as well. So we'll have 5 new CSOs to replace the ones that we are currently losing
All
to
right,
the
thank you.
full-time. Thank you.
Council comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and commission members. I'm going to start tonight with just a couple of comments about the presentation that you saw. I started my career in public service in the city as a public safety, health, and welfare commissioner for 4 years, and so naturally, public safety is something that I'm very passionate about. I've always thought that one of the roles of a city council member, and frankly, a commissioner, is to be an advocate for our public safety, public works, our parks, et cetera, and all the professionals who service those, because you have inside information that most of the public does not. And I feel the same way about being a council member. So as our deputy director was making his presentation, I thought back to the fact that when he was mentioning use of force incidences where firearms were involved, that was early on in my council career, and I had an opportunity to be at each one of those scenes to just observe what goes on. And in fact, when the officer had to shoot the individual who was attempting to speed away in their vehicle with the officer attached, it was a life or death situation, and the officer had to make a split-second decision. And that was when we were in the old City Hall Public Safety Building. And I happened to be there when the BCA came in to do interviews and investigation. The police department also has pastoral care and mental health care, much better now even than then. I think Deputy Director Rinzel would agree. But what I learned in those circumstances that has served me well as a council member is what really happens. It's not what's on TV. It's not what people go on the neighbor page on Facebook and complain about. You saw data tonight about the racial makeup of some of the use of force instances and stuff. And I always try to help people recognize what the facts are, as opposed to whatever narrative somebody with an agenda might be trying to push. And I would encourage you to do the same. When you're on scene for those things, it is the most serious situation that you'll ever see. And the professionalism of our people and the dedication to A, keeping the community safe, B, attempting to take the individual or individuals responsible for causing harm into custody safely, and then 3, protecting each other so they can go home safe at the end of the night is really front and center. And it's one of the reasons that, as our deputy director mentioned, that we are so passionate in the city of Cottage Grove about facilities like this one and the Hero Center. Equipment, which he mentioned, somebody asked a question about body-worn cameras, et cetera, and personnel. We want, as a council, beyond anything else, we want our people to get home safe, and we want our community to be safe. And that core function of government is critical to a healthy community. It is 100% at the root of whether you have a good place to live, work, and play or not. And we're very lucky that we have tremendous public safety professionals and professionals, frankly, in every department in the city who give time, energy, effort. You heard about the training. That's, again, not by accident. That's on purpose. And we want our people who are in the community to know that those things exist. So don't be afraid to talk about it. And if anybody ever has any questions or concerns and they want to reach out, shoot, we do tours of this building. We do tours of the Hero Center. We do tours of the fire station. We have open houses. We do all kinds of things to try to engage with the community to make sure that people are properly educated about what really goes on. So I would just ask for your help in that. Those moments that I was able to spend on those scenes, it's burned into my psyche forever. And I'm very grateful that I was given the opportunity to do that. I was just sitting in the Winnebago, I think, just watching how everything worked and asking questions, but it was really moving and insightful. Pivoting to a couple things that are going on in the city. Couple of development things that you're probably interested in. Number one, Renewal by Anderson just came before council at our meeting last week for their 4th expansion now in the city of Cottage Grove. They actually just had an expansion, I think, less than 18 months ago, but they are growing so fast and they're so popular. And of course, they provide great paying jobs that they just continue to expand. So that's a really exciting thing that's happening. Ryan could spend until midnight at least telling you about all the different things that are going on in the city with regard to development, redevelopment, infrastructure needs, et cetera. But one number I want you to remember is 574. 574 is the number of housing permits that we issued last year in the city of Cottage Grove. 574. So I don't know, Jeff, when you were working for the city, I mean, we were probably doing what, maybe 80 a year? Maybe? Yeah. That's a lot of work for these folks, a lot. And it expands the miles of pavement that need to be maintained. It expands the miles of pipe underground. It creates a situation where the new residents who come to the city have very high expectations for the services they're going to receive, whether that's public safety services, public works services, parks and rec services, et cetera. And we have to step up to the challenge. So when you hear our directors talk about how they've been juggling based on, geez, can we get the material that we need? And you talk about the hiring issues and all the other things. That is a day-to-day, sometimes hour-by-hour event that takes place where without the great people that we have working here and the amount of planning that goes into everything that we do, we would not be able to execute to the degree that we do, especially during a time like this where Cottage Grove is a destination. People want to be here for lots of different reasons. And it's exciting. It's actually a little scary too to try to keep up, especially when you're sitting through budget meetings. But, they're doing a phenomenal job, and our job as the council is to, again, provide them with the equipment, the material, the facilities, and the personnel that they need. So when we do budget this year, you'll hear that we're going to be making some additions to our staffing complements, et cetera, because frankly, we haven't for a really long time, and we probably needed to 5 years ago. And, now we're stuck playing catch up, but we'll get there. So Renewal by Anderson, the housing permits, a couple of other things that came before us recently. Pizza Ranch did finally sign on the dotted line, and they're coming to town. Yay, right? So they were at the last meeting. So you'll see construction over there near the Muddy Cow. And then the last thing is we did have the property owner and the developer who have been working for about 18 months or so on a plan for the Mississippi Dunes golf course area that will now become a housing development. They came forward at the last council meeting and they presented their plan. There's going to be some reiterations of those plans over the course of the next several months as the Met Council takes a look at it, and so it'll be tweaked. But by and large, it's it's done, and it looks really good, and the park down there is gonna be amazing. The access to the river is gonna be phenomenal. I know Zach and his team have been working really, really hard. We've also had some consultants, we've had the Parks Commission, we've had a lot of different people give input, and I'm guessing at some point it'll come before you as well. But it's gonna be a really neat area and provide access to the river that we've never had. On the note about parks, want to let you know that we have closed the books for 2021, basically, and the golf course was profitable to the tune of about $220,000 last year, and the ice arena was right coming up to $100,000 in profitability last year, just under that. So really, really good years after really, really good years the year before. We're very proud of the work that our team has done with our parks and our trails and our outdoor facilities like River Oaks. We have a great new chef, Chef Isaac. If you haven't been down to eat yet, make a point of getting down there. I've been there 2 of the last 3 weekends for fish fry, and the place has been packed, and the food is phenomenal. They've actually done a good job, too, of hiring servers, and those servers are being trained. They're very eager to please. They're still not 100% up and running, but they're getting better every week, and it's an exciting time for our community with those recreational things. The last thing I'd wanted to do was basically just open it up to you. If you have any questions, thoughts, concerns you want to know about, I'm here for you. Go ahead.
Any questions of our councilperson?
Regarding the renewal by Anderson, with the last addition that they did, I know a lot of residents, including me, are not happy with the jockeying of trucks and semis back on the road. Is that gonna be addressed now?
I was
hopefully?
waiting for you just to ask this question. I actually knew it was coming. So, yeah, so I'm gonna try to give you a shorter answer. I tend to get a little over verbose at times, but it's a.
Can you make a note of that first?
Yeah, please do.
Justin's gonna give us a
Yes,
shorter answer.
it's a
okay?
nuanced,
We
it's
got
a
it.
nuanced situation. The truck issue has been addressed, and maybe Ryan wants to talk a little bit more about that, but it is something that we acknowledged, it's something that we knew existed. They're looking at a couple of different ways to manage that, and then before you ask about traffic, you know, there's been quite a bit of work done on what we call the Southwest Arterial, which will be a roadway that will extend essentially from Gray Cloud out to 19 and take a little bit of the heat off of neighborhoods like yours. So I'm going to turn it over to the expert to tell you more about that, but trust me when I tell you, it was front and center during the course of the conversation because it's a known issue, and let's face it, it's a pain in the butt. We get it. It's tough to do. When you talk about homes on the Mississippi Dunes Golf Course, that's another element to that. So these are not things that go without notice or without being addressed.
Yeah, so kind of twofold. One, with the expansion, they're looking as much as they can to have any of those services of loading, unloading, all on the west side of the site. Because what they have is there's some vehicle parking and office space that's kind of just east of Ideal. So the trucks can't get from east to west without going on 100th. The other thing we're doing is we are doing the expansion to 100th this summer, making the whole thing what we'd call a 3-lane section. So right now, it's a little odd where you've got east of Ideal, you've got 2 westbound lanes, 1 eastbound lane. So it's those trucks that are going eastbound and trying to get to the main facility, the original facility, are in that through lane. So everyone's waiting behind them, they're speeding up, they're slowing down, so they're taking lefts from a through lane of traffic, which is not a good situation for a 50-mile-an-hour road. So it'll be a continuous 3-lane, so you'll have a continuous center left all the way from Jamaica, all the way down and past Hemingway, actually. So there will still be some trucks that have to go from one end of the facility to the other, but they'll actually have that left turn lane to get into and get out of the traffic, so you're not having to wait behind them anymore. So twofold, that should really, really improve it.
Yeah, and I know it's hard when you guys have dealt with everything you've dealt with over the last number of years with between aggregate and the expansion in the business park and you know, all the other stuff that we're all aware of. It's hard to say, oh, okay, so it's going to be 3 years or 5 years from now. Similar mindset to the project that's underway at Jamaica and East Point Douglas, where that entire intersections being redone. It's done in phases. So, this year will be, essentially phase one, where you're planning and acquiring right away and doing all the things that you need to do. And then, that way next year, when you're ready to put, shovels in the ground, you can start making the realignment of the roadway and the roundabouts and all that a reality. I've been able to see a lot of the traffic modeling, and if you'd ever like to see that, ask. And I'm sure, Ryan or somebody's got a flash drive with all the modeling on it. Believe it or not, from an engineering perspective, and I am not an engineer, I didn't stay at a Holiday Inn last night either, so I really don't know a lot about what I'm talking about. But I do know that the modeling shows that in the way that they grade the various roadways, the extra traffic, while it will certainly be extra traffic, isn't going to substantially impact the way in which the roadways and the movements are made. But what's really going to help is when that southwest arterial gets done, and that's a few years out yet. But they are doing a number of things to try to ease the pain of folks like you who live, your neighborhood's gorgeous, and I know it's tough. The other thing they have to try to take under consideration is when we've told those people, hey, you need to do something about all this traffic, what they do is they send them the other way and they go up over to Grosse Point and over, and then we hear about that. So, it's a challenge, but there's really smart people working on it, people much brighter than I am. Any other questions?
Thank you, Councilperson Justin.
Thank you.
With that, I will move for adjournment.
Motion.
Got one motion, no second, I guess we'll stay.
Okay,
A second, somebody?
I'll second.
All right. Meeting's over.
All right, thank you.